like to welcome everybody to the Chester Historical Society program. Just a couple of announcements before we start. I would like to invite everybody, if you haven't already been, down to the 1915 station down in the village of Chester to see the exhibit this year. Please do go. It'll be there until the last weekend in October. It's an exhibit on Chester. So please, if you haven't been there, go. There's a lot of wonderful information in the exhibit. Number two is that the Historical Society this year is celebrating 60 years, and we will be having a 60th year birthday party, so to speak, for ourselves in November, and that is open to the public, and we are hoping to make that a membership drive party and a fundraising party. There's no charge to come to the party, but donations are always welcome. Those are my two big announcements. Also, Sue Barron is in charge of our programs, so I'm going to turn it over to her now, and she will introduce our speaker this afternoon. So again, I welcome you all.
Thank you very much. Stuart McGregor was born in 1944 in Tuxedo Park and has had a lifelong adoration and love for Tuxedo as well as Tuxedo Park. Both maternal and fraternal grandparents lived in Tuxedo Park, where both grandfathers were superintendents and head gardeners of estates from the early 1900s that lasted well into the 1950s. He spent his early years living on the King Craig estate. He graduated from Boston College and began a career on Wall Street. After military service in the late 1960s, he returned to Wall Street and also received a law degree from Fordham Law School. Stuart and his wife, Jean Connolly, moved to Miami, Florida in 1976, where they raised a family, and he successfully practiced trial law for over 25 years. In 1998, he left the practice of law and worked in investor relations before starting up a sports-related business. Now retired, Stuart is still trying to figure out what he wants to do when he grows up. He resides in Coral Gables, Florida, but keeps a home in Tuxedo Park and has returned every summer and fall for the past 25 years. For over 60 years, Stuart has annually returned to Tuxedo to reflect on its history and spend time with relatives and friends who have never left this wonderful place. He has self-published a number of books, such as England and Scotland, A Journey Back in 1985, Maine and Nova Scotia in 2011, Newport, A Return to the Gilded Age in 2013, A History of King Craig and Family Recollections of Time Gone By in 2017, and Tuxedo's Parks, Past, Law, and Disorder, 2018. I may have to buy that. One of the things that Stuart asked me to present today from the United Kingdom with regards to the book, The Weewa Beach Club in Tuxedo Park, An American Story of Social Change, he's actually had a review on Amazon. The book offers a compelling look at the history of the Weewa Beach Club, originally the Tuxedo Community Club in 1936. It rebranded in 1978 to stand apart from the Tuxedo Club and provided affordable recreation for hamlet residents. The book effectively contrasts the opulent Tuxedo Park, founded in 1885, with the working class hamlet, highlighting the enduring social divide. The author's personal connection to the area adds a warm touch, with family contributions and local traditions enriching the story. I appreciate how McGregor connects the club evolution to broader societal shifts and addresses modern wealth inequality. While the detailed historical content can be dense, the nostalgic reflections and personal anecdotes create a strong emotional connection. The historical photographs add depth, though some AI-enhanced images seem a bit off. Overall, this book gave me new insights into American history and social issues. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in the dynamics of privilege, community, and societal change. And Stuart let me know that the person who wrote this review has never even been to Tuxedo. So, just so you know. So, it's now my privilege and honor to present Stuart McGregor, who I met for the first time in May, and I've really appreciated him for the times that we've spent together. So, good luck, Stuart.
Well, that was the speech. So, and please, if you can't hear me in the back row, just raise your hand, and I will speak louder than I am now. First, Sue, Treasurer and Program Chair, thank you very much. I would also like to thank Cliff Patrick, who's the Chester Town historian, and Debbie Lou Vidalia, who's the new president. Where is Debbie? There she is. Way to go, Debbie. It's keeping history alive. You know, it's a thankless task. I'm really happy to speak here today. I realize, actually I was telling Sue before, I never thought about the fact that today is the opening of really the first Sunday of NFL football season, and the Giants are playing today. So I really appreciate all of you coming out. Also, you know, I did this book, and when I talked with Sue, she said, well, you know, there's a bit of a Chester connection, and I said, yes, there is. Let me kind of see if we can't put something together. So I might move rather quickly through some of the things that are in this book. I want to make sure I get to some of the Chester connections before we end, because I don't want to go, as my wife Jean sitting over there texting knows, she could probably give this speech as well as me and do it in half the time. But,
she's not texting Stuart, she's taking a picture.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome, Jean.
Okay. Well, you know, it's funny because I never really, and it's very parochial to say, but as far as Chester was concerned, when I grew up in Tuxedo and in Tuxedo Park, parochially, I was always looking south. I was never really looking north that much. But there's a lot in common. But Chester predated the American Revolution, whereas Tuxedo and Tuxedo Park, they're newbies. I mean, they really didn't even exist until 1885. It was just a place called the Woodpile on Harriman's Erie Railroad, which he started in 1841, because the railroads were using wood at that time. And the Laurellards owned a tremendous amount of property down there in that area. So let me see how I'm going to try and move without throwing all these pages on the floor. Okay, so it was a country here in Chester, country folks, when I grew up. But it was, as a young boy, it's very interesting because my mother's brother, his name was Bill Barth. He got married and moved to Chester. Yeah. He, for some of the older folks here, you might remember, Bill owned the Gulf Station, which is now, I think, I'm not sure what it is now, Shell, I guess.
Shell, I think.
Across from the CVS. And Bill and Sis, my aunt and uncle, they lived up on the road going east along towards Camp LaGuardia. And it was very interesting to me because as a boy about 8 years old or so, when we would come up to visit, sometimes Bill and Sis wouldn't be home. We'd get there before them, and we'd go in and we'd find a gentleman, I'll call him a gentleman, kind of sitting on the porch, sometimes two. They would be sleeping or just, and then Bill and Sis would come home and kind of shoo them away, and they'd get up and shuffle on down the road. And that's the first time I realized in those days Camp LaGuardia was for alcoholics or guys in the Bowery on the streets of New York, and I would get them out of the city and send them up here. Of course, there was nothing to keep them in, so whenever they got the occasion to maybe walk downtown and find a little refreshment, they'd take advantage of it. But it was a longer walk than they expected, so they stopped on the way and went to sleep. So Bill and Sis had two sons, my cousins, Billy and Dave Barth. Billy Barth was graduated from Chester, and then he went into car racing because he pretty much was interested in that with his father all his life. Unfortunately, he passed away in a car accident. My younger cousin, Dave Barth, went to Chester. He was a great basketball player, and he would he went on to go to the Naval Academy. Left the Naval Academy after a year and finished up at Holy Cross, at which time he went into service to fulfill his duty. He was in the Marines, an officer, served 3 tours in Vietnam, came back, joined the FBI, and then retired from the FBI. But both of them, they were older than me, early 50s. They were kind of teenagers or so. And when I would come up, it would be say hello, and then here's a 22. Let's go out in the pasture, and we'll shoot groundhogs, or we'll shoot anything other than the cows. So that was kind of my first experience with the 22. So moving through here, I also remember the times in Chester because this is such a wonderful place. I mean, Tuxedo is kind of stuck in this little valley on Route 17, and so there's not a lot of broad land, which is how we kind of get to one of our connections. Once you kind of come north a little bit and you start to see the beautiful, and I remember the beautiful barns and pastures and the farmlands and all the cows. And then I started to realize, basically, Sue, because we said, let's expand this if we can. Chester was a thriving community going back from the Revolutionary War on, because they supplied produce and milk to New York City using the railroads. Also, I believe that George Washington slept here, as he has in so many hundreds of places, they say. As far as Tuxedo was concerned, well before Pierre Lorillard got involved, the best we can do, or the best Tuxedo can do, is say that George Washington marched through it. And we'll get to that. But, so my book really has to do with Tuxedo and Tuxedo Park. As you can see, it's the Weewalt Beach Club. And back in the 1800s, this woodpile was sitting there, and we have, if we go to the next picture, as we move along, you can see the outlines of it with the 3 lakes. And we can go to the next picture. And as I said, the Lorillard family, who was extremely wealthy, and this is Pierre Lorillard IV, tobacco fortune. Now Lorillard, he liked to gamble, he liked yachting, he liked horse racing, actual horses, not trotters and pacers so much, although they did some of that. But he liked horse racing, and he actually had one of his horses, Iroquois, was the first American horse to be bred and owned by an American and sent over to England and won the English Derby. Wow. So he really, he had his place in Newport, which we'll go to the next slide, but he really didn't like all that Newport stuff that was going on as far as socializing goes with all these very, very rich people. So he sold his place to none other than Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt didn't do much with it because shortly after it burned down. But that gave Vanderbilt the opportunity to then build one of probably the best well-known and biggest mansion in Newport, and which is open to the public today. And so I'm going to be moving through here because my wife will raise her hand and say, hey. And so I have a couple of questions first. And number one is, how many here are aware or have watched The Gilded Age on HBO Max? We've got some hands raised. Not too many, but it's an excellent series. It's gone through 2 seasons, and it's actually been renewed, and they just finished filming some of the 3rd season in Troy, New York, which is where they did the other 2. It's done by Julian Fellows, who is an excellent producer and did Downton Abbey. How many of you have seen Downton Abbey? A few more hands. So this is kind of the American Downton Abbey that he's working on now. And I think the 3rd season should be out in a year or so. Now, what happened here is that, what happened to Lorillard? Well, he came back to New York City, and there's 2 different versions, but apparently he came back to New York City and he went, gee, I have 6 brothers and sisters, and we own all this property, and I'd like to create, I'm a member of all these private clubs in New York, but you know, it's getting crowded. We've got a lot of people coming in, immigration-wise, everybody's moving uptown, the streets are filthy dirty, there's a lot of manufacturing going on in Brooklyn and on the west side and the east side. So, you know, I think what I'd like to do is maybe start a recreational club for the very wealthy, and I can do this up about an hour outside of New York. At that time, it would be like a full day's coach ride. So we can go to the next slide, I think, and we should get there. And so what he did was he came out on the train and got off at the woodpile, bought out his brothers and sisters, and owned this fairly large piece of property that we saw on that map. Much more, but just carved out a section of it. And he said, I'm going to create Tuxedo Park. So he hired a young architect, Bruce Price. And Bruce came out with him on the railroad, and they took a little, it used to be the logging road, up over a hill, and they looked down on Tuxedo Lake. And Lorillard started. I'd like a house there, I would like a house there, I would like a house there, I'd like a house there. And Price could hardly keep up with him. But this was in 1885, and basically in 8 months, they managed to fence in this entire property, Tuxedo Park, with an 8-foot fence and some barbed wire on top, create this huge stone gate, which we'll see more of in a second, but hold on one second. And you can see that it's exclusively for members of the Tuxedo Club. Because what happened was, he went to his union club meeting and said, look guys, I got a great new club for recreation and everything. It's not far outside the city. We're going to have hunting, fishing. We're going to have skating. We're going to have curling. We're going to have everything you could think of, bobsledding, golf, you name it, we'll have it. And I've got these lots, and if you want, you can buy a lot. But before you can buy a lot, you've got to be approved to be a member of the Tuxedo Club. So that occurred. Now I think we can move. And that's a picture a little bit later, but you can see now we're into the 1900, but also there's still coaches that were used by those that were living there to get around. Let's go to the next one. Now, at the time, one of the other things he said we would have is a gun club. So we're going to have a gun club, and there was a perfect spot on the third lake, which was called the Wee Wall. Now, for all the research I've done, no one could ever tell me, and I can't find it, why it was named the Wee Wall. I know why Tuxedo was named. It was named because of an Indian name. that they kind of manufactured and maneuvered a little bit and created the Tuxedo. But this was the Weewaw, and there was a spit of land, a peninsula called Pigeon Point. And you can see, it's not a great picture, but you can see the gun club there. And the gun club was very interesting because they did a lot of shooting. And a fellow named Albie Winslow did a history of Tuxedo Park years ago. And what he did was, they used live pigeons. New York State outlawed live pigeons in I believe 1889. But that didn't stop Tuxedo Park. It was a private area anyway. So they kept using pigeons. And Albie, he went and he did some research at the Tuxedo Club. I'm not a member of the Tuxedo Club. I wasn't allowed to go in and look at their records. But he went in, and in his book, he said, I'm going to look at 1889, and he looked at the expenses for the gun club, for pigeons. He found the number that they paid for pigeons, and then he researched what pigeons cost per pigeon, and he did a simple division and found out in 1889 they shot about 80,000 live pigeons. So, that's a lot of recreation, a lot of shotgun pellets. In fact, I had a friend growing up talk about his grandfather in a minute, but when he was a kid, he used to go down to the dam on the north end and rescue some of these pigeons that weren't dead and bring them back to the house and kind of take care of them back at the house. So, basically, I'm going to move through, just because of time, the Weewaw Beach Club itself for now, but it closed in 2021. So when you ask, what caused you to write the book? Well, I think as was mentioned, my grandfather was the one that kind of got things rolling to create this Weewaw Beach Club. Back then it was the Tuxedo Community Club in 1936. My maternal grandfather was the first vice president. My mother was the treasurer at the time before she was married. She remained the treasurer, and my Aunt Marie took over and was a treasurer for over 30 years. And my Uncle Jim Barth, who was my mother's brother, well, he was a lifeguard on the board, the executive committee, you name it, he was on it. Unfortunately, this Weewaw Beach Club that has been in existence from 1936 was shut down by the mayor of Tuxedo, the former mayor of Tuxedo Park, in 2021. It now still exists, but it's only available to the people that live within the gates in the village of Tuxedo Park. The village of Tuxedo Park was incorporated in 1950. Before that, from 1886 until 1950, it was operated by the Tuxedo Park Association. What Lorillard did was he put everything under the control of this corporation, the Tuxedo Park Association. And they were like, it would be like your public management today, your municipal departments. But essentially, they all kind of reported to the Board of Governors of the Tuxedo Club, because everything that happened in Tuxedo Park was really basically dealt with by club members. So, the other thing, before I go a little any further, I always usually start off with a little bit of a story that doesn't have anything to do with this. And as I look out, I like to play golf. And when I'm in Florida, I have 3 other guys I play golf with at least once a week. And there's one guy who tells these fantastic jokes. And it doesn't fail that when I'm getting ready to go up on the tee, he comes up and says, Stu, wait a second. I've got a really great joke to tell you. He said, it's fantastic. You're going to fall down laughing at this. He said, but please, stop me if you've heard it before. And basically, every time I just go, Joe, go ahead and tell me the joke, because I don't even remember playing golf with you last week. My short-term memory is terrible. My long-term memory has been very, very good. And so the reason for this book was basically when the beach club was closed, I said, boy, I've been working on this thing for 10 years, a little bit of a biography, as well as the history. I need to get it done, and that's what caused me to publish this book. Now, I'm looking here, I'm going to get ahead of myself. We got Pierre, we're moving right through. Sold the Newport place, look at this, wow. So, where are we now? Let's go to the next slide. The houses that were originally built, this one was the Chandler House. As you can see, it doesn't look that big. However, it was big enough to have staff and to hold parties, large parties, and we could move along. As you see here, this is one of the Tuxedo Club members, now a house owner, like the Chandlers would be, coming out from the city for a weekend, or perhaps a longer stay, of course by coach at that point in time. And you can see their coachman and second man. Tuxedo was used in the fall and the spring, as well as at Christmas and New Year's. Because in the summers, they all went to the mansions in Newport. In the winters, they basically were going to South Carolina at that time, Hilton Head or one of those places, Jekyll Island, or after 1903-04, when Henry Flagler put the railroad through down to Key West, actually, Palm Beach got developed. So then everybody that lived in Tuxedo Park, not only did they have the mansions on Fifth Avenue in New York, and the mansions in Newport, but they also had a mansion in Palm Beach. So, I mean, everywhere. I mean, the money was just unbelievable. So, we're now at a point in time where we want to move on a little bit. Give you an example. You can see way over in the corner is Pigeon Point. This was the Carhart estate. Not a shabby place. Not a huge place. Unfortunately, burned down. As so many did, as you'll see. Once we got into the 30s, we couldn't get staff. It's time to cut back. I don't know whether they had good insurance policies or what, but somehow a lot of these seem to burn down. So, next. Where are we next? Let's see what we got. Aha! So, at the time, the Weewar Lake, and you could see what we just looked at, that's Carhart up there on the right, and to the left is Gene, do you remember their names? Frelinghuysen. Been through this a bit. Anyway, so they had a beach off of Pigeon Point, as well as the gun club. And when they did the original Tuxedo Club, they didn't have a place to swim. Tuxedo Lake is a reservoir. We drink the water from Tuxedo Lake. There's no power boats allowed. Electric launches are allowed, but no power boats because it's a reservoir. But they had Pond 3, which was for skating and tobogganing down the hill onto the lake. And of course the Weewar, where they had the gun club, and also this beach. So this is where the first beach was created. They only used it 2 or 3 hours a day. But if we go on to the next slide, now this was Charlie Jones. This is the fellow I was talking about. He lived across from the gun club. He was responsible for maintaining the gun club and also for being the lifeguard at the beach and teaching these people how to swim. So I don't know who she is, but Charlie's giving her a lesson. So let's keep going. We'll move through that. And we get to one of the things that I really liked was the races. Once a year, they would have races. And this one I want to really kind of get into a little bit. because the races were quite incredible. The fellow with the cap on was Gilbert Bush. Gilbert Bush was, I think, the second, but basically the first police chief from 1886, 87 until 1931.
Whoa.
And so Bush was the one who judged the races. A lot of gambling going on. These guys gambled like you couldn't believe. It was unreal. So anyway, every day during that period of time, from 86 well into the early 1900s, there would be articles in the New York Times about what's going on in Tuxedo Park. And one of the things they reported that I thought was kind of interesting is, let's see, they would have a number of different types of events, but my favorite was they had canoes, all kinds of different things going on, but my favorite was what they called down the chute, which apparently was some type of a slide. Wow. Down the chute, swimming 100 yards to a raft, putting on a shirt, lighting a cigar, and returning 100 yards to shore with a cigar still lit. The winners and participants in all these races were reported in the New York Times. I mean, that was crazy. But they were the titans of that we hear about back in those days, the Gilded Age. So I thought that was always pretty cool. Now, if we go to the next picture, across the lake from that beach was the Voss House. He had what was claimed to be one of the largest private libraries in the country. And you can see that fellow, it's a very poor AI enhancement image. That fellow there is Mark Twain. Mark Twain used to rent a cottage. He was very good friends with Henry Hudson Rogers. Rogers was one of the founders with Rockefeller and Standard Oil. It seemed like Tilford, who lived in the park as well, Tilford was also one of the founders of Standard Oil. That's the type of people that had bought into Lorillard's plan. So if we could go to the next one, we're now getting to the stage where I want to talk about, and what my book really talks about, is three people that are kind of, to me, make the book come alive. The first is Frelinghuysen, Lily Frelinghuysen. To the left, my left, your left. That's Theodore Frelinghuysen, and next to him is Fred. They are at the grandstands of the track because there was a racetrack in Tuxedo. They used to have harness races in Tuxedo on a much smaller scale than you would find here with Delafields, or in Goshen, obviously, was the main track because of E.H. Harriman. But so they would have horse shows here. They would have the cadets from West Point, the cavalry come down and have jumping exhibitions and all kinds of exhibitions. They would have dog shows here, horse shows before they went into New York for the Westminster Dog Show or for the National Horse Show. The other thing is in 1889, they had a football game, a college football game. The Princeton 11 came up and played the East Orange Athletic Club. And it was a 0-0 tie, but they had quite a few people come out in attendance at that time. So we're talking about the Frelinghuysen's, Theodore. Frelinghuysen's were a major league family in New Jersey. In fact, I think Frelinghuysen is in Congress today, still in Congress today. But they're very, very political. Of course, they were, landed gentry, go way, way back to the 1600s. And so one of the brothers was Ballantine Beer, if you remember Ballantine Beer. But Theodore married a woman named Coates, whose father was from Scotland, and they had a thread business. In fact, they were the largest manufacturers of threads in the entire world. So Theodore was in the business and of course was, he was taken care of. He's doing very well. But he wanted to get married. And he married the Coates girl, but not shortly thereafter, not too long, about a year or so, she died. At the same point in time, there's another woman in the city, and her name was Lily, Elizabeth Cannon, and she was from Detroit. Her father was the mayor of Detroit. And basically, she came to New York City and then went to Europe with her grandmother, because this was the time when they were going overseas to find suitable husbands that had titles. The title people over there needed money, so that was that perfect connection. She went over, there were reports that came back she was engaged. However, it seemed like nothing came of it, so she came back to the United States. She got married to this fellow Cannon, and a couple of years, Cannon died. So now we have Theodore, very eligible bachelor, and Lily, and the next thing you know, they get married. Huge reception. They have to close off Fifth Avenue. Police close off Fifth Avenue because of the crowds that come out to see it. And essentially, what happens is, Lily says, I want a house in Tuxedo Park. So we go ahead and we cook again. We go to Tuxedo Park. That's Lily. Very hard to find a picture of her. But she was a grande dame, lived to be about 93 years old. 93, she still had the Tuxedo Park house, as well as a big house that he built for her down in Palm Beach, where President Harding would come down on the presidential yacht and visit them. Let's go to the next picture. And this was their mansion at the time in New York City. It doesn't look like a mansion, but it was down on 14th Street. And it's amazing. They could fit 100, 200 people in this place. I don't know where, but in their ballroom for parties. Next picture. Lily wanted a place in Tuxedo Park? Fine. Build you a place in Tuxedo Park. Wow. So this exists today. A lot of these houses that we'll see, they still exist. All of them are privately owned. What I always say to people is that, Newport, you can drive down Bellevue Avenue and you can see more mansions than it takes 2 or 3 days to visit them all, because they're all now open, restored and open to the public. Great historical society that they have. Tuxedo, you can't get through the gates unless you know somebody. As a matter of fact, question number 2, how many people have been inside the gates of Tuxedo Park and had a chance to drive around in there? Quite a few. So, so you either know some very rich people, or yes, question.
They wouldn't let me in the gate. They had to call the person I was going to go see.
Yes, you can call down and they'll put you on a list to say, I don't want to see anybody unless you call me first.
Right.
We don't do that.
Sometimes they don't let me in.
Now we don't do that, and now you know my name. So, and in any case, we have Lily. Now, in the meantime, the Tuxedo Club had built a new pool. In fact, the old club kind of wasn't sufficient, and they got rid of it, and they built a very, very nice new Tuxedo Club. And they built a beautiful pool, and they also had a tennis courts and an in-court court tennis. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, that was like a 14th century thing you play indoors with a dull ball and a big old tennis racket. And I have a friend who says that you speed it up, says, if you play 20, 30 matches, you can get a national ranking, because it's very hard to understand what the rules are. Anyway, the people in the Tuxedo Club stopped using the beach. And as a result, And we can go to the next slide. The kids, my father here, and his sister there, my aunt, who passed away a few years ago, Marina Carroll, it shows them sitting on one of the logs. That's how, if you remember looking at those last pictures of the guys, that's how they sectioned off swimming areas. So they would come down and come through the properties and the walks and what have you, and go to the beach and swim. It's hot in the summer. Nobody's using it. Nobody seemed to be minding that they did it. And so they did it. However, let's go to the next one. Aha. These were permits that anybody outside the gates. Laurel Art also created the town of Tuxedo, at least what we call the hamlet, not Southfields or Eagle Valley or any of those places, but he created the hamlet because he brought in 1,800 workers from Slavic countries as well as Italy. They were the Italians were the stonemasons, the Slavics were digging the ditches and pulling and tugging. In order for them to get inside the park, they had to have an employee's permit. So, however, as time went on, it wasn't just my aunts and my father and all the children in the park that worked on the estates or lived on the estates because their parents were working there. The ones in the hamlet outside the gates were finding ways to get in. So next slide. This was the East Village, which is across the tracks, across the river. Of course, that's where all the Italians lived. The Slavic village was further up the line on the other side of the Ramapo, but it was really cardboard, you name it. That's whatever they could find to use as shelters. But these are the people that built it, built the park, and worked in the park. So let's go to the next one. There were also the people, I call them the stores people. That happens to be Route 17. There was the Orange Turnpike in those days. As you can see, there were a lot of stores and whatever. Again, Laurel Art created it. You need this, you need that, we need a laundry, we need a hardware store, we need this, we need that, we need a library, we need a post office, and we need a train station. He created all of that. So, let's go to the next one. That's the train station.
Yep.
Talk about that in a minute, because that's where these guys from the park would come down in their coaches, and there was an express train from Tuxedo down to Jersey City at that time, which they would take to go into their jobs at Wall Street and the financial district. It was express, because the stock markets didn't open until 10, they closed at 3. Most of these people in Tuxedo were bankers, lawyers, or just mercantile guys with a ton of money, or Standard Oil guys. So they would come down and take this train. It was called the Millionaire. Okay, so the Millionaire was always interesting to me because when we get a little later and we talk about Robert Goulet with our place over here, our Delafield, or this Brook Farm up here, these guys are all on directors and presidents of banks. And they're all going in on this train, and they're all sitting around, and it's kind of like, it's a Monopoly game where everybody wins. You know, I mean, these were times when it would be like, well, listen, so-and-so has got the coal coming from Pennsylvania. Well, how are we going to get it from Pennsylvania to the city? Well, I got the railroad. We'll get the railroad to take it into Jersey. Okay, what happens then? Vanderbilt. I got the shipping, they'll take it across. Oh, well, we got it done. All we got to figure out is, what are we going to charge? Charge whatever you want. Nobody cares. So that's the way business was done. We'll go to the next slide. The people from outside the park, as I said, Italian village, Slavic village, and the stores people started coming in, along with like my mother, my father. And this is a picture of them at the beach with in the background you can see the pigeon stand where the fellow would release the pigeons for the gun club. Well, what happened with Mrs. Frelinghuysen was that she complained to the Board of Governors of the Tuxedo Club that she did not like to have tea with her friends and look down at the riffraff that was using what was the Tuxedo Club beach. Club guy said, okay, we'll take care of that. We'll just move everybody to the north side of that peninsula. So I moved them over to the north side of the peninsula. The TPA built some bathhouses for them and a dock. We can go to the next slide. And you can see them here. Go to the next slide. This is the North Beach. And as you can see, just a little dock there. And what happened was, it wasn't long before, it was a very deep drop-off.
Stuart?
Very short. Really? Already?
Almost.
Wow. Okay. Well, it's all in the book. In any case, someone, and I could not document this, but I did hear it. I heard a lot of things at the dinner table from my grandparents and the people that were staff at the different houses growing up, one of which was very interesting, right, regarding Lily Frelinghuysen, that I remember to this day when they were all playing pinochle because I was about 8 years old, 7 years old, and of course you don't forget these things, but Lily didn't like to use toilet paper in her bathroom. She liked to use linen.
Oh my goodness.
God. Now, I thought that was the funniest thing. I've never forgotten that. Everybody had a good laugh over it when they were playing pinochle and what have you. But then I realized that bidets were very popular in Europe back in the 18th century, all the way through, still are. But when the servicemen went over in World War I and World War II, the only time they were going to see a bidet is if they were in a house of ill repute. So they were going to come back and say, hey, there's a great invention I saw while I was over there. Now we got to get a bidet. So it never caught on in this country. So my thinking is that she probably had a bidet, so, you know, rather than cloth, she was using linen because, but I thought it was just hilarious when I heard, what? Okay. You know, she's going to the bathroom and she's using linen, you know? Anyway, they're over here swimming. Somebody drowns. Now, they found him, but apparently, the person that drowned didn't even live outside the gates in the village, had come in with someone from the village. And so the ones that lived in the park, like my parents and others, said, get that person in your car and get out of here as fast as you can. Go over to the next lake you can find or go down the Rampo River and then call it in. Because they didn't want to call the gate and say there's been a drowning and then find out it's not even people from the hamlet. It's some foreigner. And they said, we'll never be able to swim again. So we can move on. And I will, that's Mabel Tansey. Mabel Tansey worked at the club. This is a still of a 1925 8mm movie that I have on DVDs. She worked as a lifeguard at the Tuxedo Club. She was the president of the Weewa Beach Club for a long, long time. We'll keep moving through. And we'll see. The next person other than Lily Frelinghuysen, actually what happened was, after that drowning, everybody said, well, we don't want to swim over here. They moved back to the real beach, and I never heard anything from Mrs. Frelinghuysen. Or maybe she did complain, and the people at the club said, we're tired of listening to you. Because Lily was one of those that was driving her carriage and would whip at the cars when they started driving cars. He was very, very formal. Very, very formal. This is George Grant Mason. Long story, we're not going into it. It's in the book somewhat. It's been in other books. Very interesting. He basically inherited a fortune from his uncle. His uncle inherited a fortune from his uncle. And so he wound up being out in the Midwest, got a telegram that said, come to New York. You've been mentioning your uncle's will. He had no idea what was going on. He came to New York and he was left $25 million back in 1900. And also he was left the estate of King Craig, which is where I grew up. I grew up in a corner apartment of a garage that was the size of a football field. My grandparents grew up on one corner. My mother and father took another corner. We had 3 chauffeurs. They took over another corner. And they also had other people that took over the 4th corner. There was huge trucks to take them in and out of the city. Place up in Maine. You name it. So anyway, George Graham Mason, a very generous guy and a very, very, very well-meaning guy. The other key person in Tuxedo Park was George F. Baker, which the school is named after. George F. Baker and George Graham Mason, which the grammar school is named after. Whenever anybody needed something, these guys would write the check. Didn't matter how much. We'll build the school. We'll build the hospital. We'll take care of everybody. They were very generous. Some others weren't so generous. So anyway, here we are. He owned basically the top of one of the mountains on the west side of the lake, and where I grew up, not only was there the garage, there were also stables. There was had his own water tower. They grew every vegetable and flower plant you can imagine, fruit trees, you name it. He had the gravel, long quarter-mile gravel drive. I used to look through the gates of the garage when Mr. Mason would go in with his chauffeur, and my grandfather would have a couple of guys that could rake the tire treads on the gravel so that he wouldn't see it when he came home. However, we were very fortunate because my father and my sister and his 2 brothers, they got chauffeured down to the school in the hamlet. So that was very nice. Very, very nice. And also, interestingly enough, my aunt is the youngest of the 4, 3 boys and a girl. Well, my grandmother had my Aunt Marie. Mrs. Mason came down and said to my grandmother, whose name was Marie, Marie, I think you need a maid. And brought her a maid. So here you have, my grandfather was working as a superintendent and head gardener, and my grandmother's got a maid, amazing. So we'll keep going. So that's a picture of King Craig today, private residence. Looks pretty much as it did back when it was first built by Mason's uncle. Next picture. We're going to skip through some of these, but this is just an example of it. 1927, they wanted to make some improvements to the Tuxedo Club. George Mason says, subscription for the new clubhouse is for $25,000. You got it. Encloses a check, card duly signed. Frelinghuysen, he says, I don't think we need to do any additions to the club. We just to bring in some younger members that have a more gentlemanly interest in terms of what we do. Let's go and move on. So, that's my grandfather, Duncan McGregor. We'll keep going. What happened was, as all the children were growing up now, he said, we need to have a beach club. Nobody's using that beach. How about if we create a club? So he went around and talked to others that were on the estates. He talked to the stores guys, the druggists. He talked to the chauffeurs. They all kept in touch with each other. And he went to Mr. Mason and said, we'd like to start a beach club. Won't cost you anything, but it'll be a beach club. We'll do a geographic limitation area just for the hamlet outside the gates, for the people who built the park, work in the park, and for the people that live in the park and work in the park. And Mason said, check it out, make sure you got all your ducks in a row, and then come back to me. So he had everybody working, they were all talking. Chauffeurs would talk, you know, to their bosses on the way into the train or into the city. Everybody's talking. Comes back in 1936. My grandfather goes to Mason and says, I think we're ready. He said, write a letter, send it to Macaluso, who was the head of the TPA, and it'll find its way to me. Letter written, and Mr. Macaluso, general manager of the TPA, boom. Next thing you know, approved. Go through. We'll keep buzzing. Said, okay, you got it, but you know nobody's going to pay. We're not paying any money for this. Don't worry. Created articles of incorporation. We'll just keep going. Keep going. So those were your articles of incorporation, and there are your officers and your board of directors. All of them were fairly responsible and well known to everyone in the town of Tuxedo and Tuxedo Park. Okay, keep going. Again, my mother is the treasurer, 1937. She's sending Macaluso a letter, thank you very much. Keep going. He sends a letter back. Thank you, appreciate it. Tuxedo Community Club is formed. And we'll just keep going through, and we see that the first year we wound up with I think, what is it, cash on hand, $2.20. So they made it work. But the interesting thing about it is, this, what was started in 1936, lasted until 2021. Wow. And it lasted because the people that ran it wanted to keep the dues as low as possible so that the people could afford it. So they continually just scraped by every single year, and they did any number of things to try and raise money. And usually they were successful at it. We can keep going forward. That's the gun club. They stopped shooting at the gun club sometime in the 30s, 40s. And ultimately, the TPA gave it to the Tuxedo Community Club to be the Weewalt Beach Club so that they could use it. You know, it was a thunderstorm. There's a place to go. There was the women's changing rooms were upstairs. The men's changing rooms were downstairs. There were some ping pong tables and whatever. Let's go for it. We're going to go through these quickly. One thing they had in Tuxedo Park, on July 4th, it was open to everybody. Everybody would come up, they would have a parade. So they would have a parade, we'll go through, they have a band, and initially, everybody could go on the club grounds for sandwiches and refreshments, but they also had the fire engines, which in those days, we could go on. If you could go back one, just go back one. Next one. Forward. Oh, forward, forward. Uh-oh, I hope everything's good. Oh, there I am. Got my good spot there. And what they would do is they would drive around Pond 2 packed with these kids. The sirens going, the bells clanging. You know, you can't imagine that today. You know, the lawyers got involved. Yep. Right. We don't have any of that. Same with the beach. There used to be a lot of slides into the water, a diving board. No, lawyers got involved. Okay, we can keep moving here. The other thing they did at the beach, recreation. They created a recreation program for the kids. Again, here I am. Go to the next one. This is about the same time. Keep going. That's my younger son in 1993. Wow. Picture of me was probably back in 1948, 49. Same plan every single year. Right. Same events, same ropes, you name it, it was going. We keep going. Swimming races, you know, watermelon race and all that kind of thing. This one is a special one for me because I can remember when I did my first jump off the board, where you know you go out there and you're standing there, and there's a crowd like this, jump, Stuart, jump. And I'm like, jump, jump, Stuart. And my father would be in the water, come on, come on, come on. And ultimately I'd jump, and I'd come up, and then I'd dog paddle back into shore. Well, I did it for my son, and the expression when he comes up out of the water on his face brought such joy to my heart. And I'm sure the same thing happened with my father. So we're moving ahead. Now what happened is they drained the lake. In 1954, Governor Dewey, and it'll be in the book, decided to go forward with the thruway plan, and what they did was, Tuxedo was the third oldest golf course in the country. Half of it was on the other side, on the west side of Route 17 in the Ramapo River. Well, he decided to have that go right through the back nine of the Tuxedo Golf Club. Some question as to whether it might have been that Dewey, who came to live in Tuxedo Park when he was the district attorney in the city, wasn't the right kind of guy, and I think maybe he didn't get invited to join the club. And so he kind of kept that in his mind and said, I'll kind of take care of them. So they drained the lake, and when they drained the lake, we go to the next one. There it is, the Continental Road. There's the, and I've walked on it with my kids in the 80s when they had to drain the lake again. Washington built that road called the Corduroy Road, or the Continental Road, because they couldn't use the Orange Turnpike because of the Tories on both the west and the east sides. They couldn't go up the Orange Turnpike. They had to come over the mountains from Jersey and come up this way on their way as they headed to West Point to stop the British from coming out up the river to essentially break the colonies in half. And of course, Townsend, who had the ironworks and Sterling mines, that was all part of creating the chain that they put across the Hudson. Let's go to the next one. As I can see my wife just kind of waving, speed it up. So what happens is, beach gets closed for any number of reasons. Throughout this period of time, as I said, Tuxedo, the village of Tuxedo Park was incorporated in 1950. The beach club needed to lease the property during this time, every summer. They would have to work from Memorial Day to Labor Day. They would have to sign a lease with, initially with TPA, which was really just the rich guys, municipal people. But now it was incorporated, so they had to sign a lease with the mayor. From 1950 until 2021, when the mayor refused to give them a lease, they fought. Every year was a fight. Every year, people in the park would complain. If there was garbage on the road, they would say, the garbage is coming from the people outside the gates that are using the beach. You know, they'd see Rockland County license plates and say, these people can't be from Tuxedo, they have Rockland County license plates. The only problem was, in those days, you could go to Goshen, or you could go to whatever it was, New City, and get your plates, and they put the county on at that time. So people went to New City rather than going up to Goshen to get their plates. So they were legit. Let's keep going. They closed the beach. This is we're going to just really run through these pictures so I can get to our Chester connection before everybody leaves. So the president's Tommy too. So let's just move through these bocce games. Keep going. Bonnie, who was a last president, who was president for about 30 years. We'll just keep running through. This is a beach scene with the crowd. Now, I guess we've moved, if this is in the right place, because this is Richard Delafield's Brook Farm in Tuxedo Park. So let's keep going and see what we got here. Yes, this is Brook Farm, and I will go to Delafield.
So he called it Brook Farm in Tuxedo Park as well?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Look at all this stuff, huh?
And he referred to it as his cottage in Tuxedo?
Well, he had a house. We have a picture of his house. So, I don't know why this way up here, but in any case, We can go to the next one. Oh, that's back at the lake for those events. More people from the hamlet, Italian village, more pictures of the lake. We'll just keep going. I said they needed to raise money. They did a play, even you. Now, we'll just run through these. Everybody that was involved. My uncle's in the white suit here, my Uncle Jim. These are all young people, or young parents, or whatever. They put on a stage show and raised money that way. We just keep flipping. That's my mother in the middle, doing a Charleston, I guess. That's everybody up there. I was on the stage at Tuxedo High School, and you can see the tickets. Even you, 75, what is it, 75 cents? 40 cents for kids. Keep going. We're back to, how do we get back to this?
Americans have always had a fascination with the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
Here we go, the next one.
You may have
Again, keep going. This was all at the beach. This is what it looked like. Here's some of the letters coming from the mayor, back and forth, complaining. This is the Zupko family. Keep going. That's Mabel Tansey, growing up. Not the best picture. This is more when they were younger. My mother and father, my aunt and my father in that one. Keep going. This is my Uncle Jim, my Aunt Marie, Marion Patola, who was the secretary, and Tom Salierno, who was very helpful to the beach, very, very helpful to the beach. My aunt, as I said, over 30 years as a treasurer, the same with Marion as a secretary, and my Uncle Jim. So we'll just keep rolling, just keep going. This is a mayor, that's a mayor, that's me and a friend of mine. Keep going. That's my mother, with you can still see the, go ahead, the pigeon grounds in the back. Mrs. St. George was the congressman in Orange County. Down in Washington, she was responsible for a committee in the House that did the zip codes. And as a result, guess what the zip code is for Tuxedo? 10987. Real easy to remember. She's a wonderful woman, lived next door to my maternal grandparents. We spent a lot of time over there at St. George's. But keep going. Keep going, keep going. That's just, what happened was, it burned down. The gun club burned down. That was the replacement that they did. Just nothing. Another thing they did, they had a movie, Pink Panther. Raise money. We'll keep going.
You would think someone could just write one check, you know?
What's that?
You would think that another resident would just be able to write a check.
Keep going. Oh, one resident could easily write a check. Oh, Robert Goulet.
Yeah.
Huh.
Not the one we know.
This is the Robert Goulet that Harriman was, he wanted Mary Harriman to marry Robert Goulet. The Goulets were unbelievably wealthy. They owned all the property from 14th Street in New York City to 47th Street.
Wow.
They're still one of the richest families in the country today. Let's keep moving. Let's see where we go with this thing. There's a slide, doesn't exist because of the lawyers. Tom Salierno, he was president for a number of years. That's Tony. He ran the concession stand. Couldn't get by Tony to the picnic area without going to your parents and saying, oh, just went by Tony, can I have 10 cents to get a Coke? So this is Tuxedo Lake with some of the houses. And what we see here is, this one was Delafield's home. Not a really big place, but he was one of the earliest to build a place there. It burned down, he rebuilt it. Oh, celebrities. We're going to get into the Chester now. As time went on, there were people that lived in the park that weren't really able to get into the club. So they joined the Weewa Beach Club. Ray Anthony. Next one. Nix. Howard Shore. Number of Oscars for his music scores and film. Next one. Richard Kiley, Man of La Mancha. My cousin used to go down to the beach and see him standing there doing his lines and singing his songs at the beach. Next one. Robert Duvall. Lived down the street from us. Very generous to the community, particularly to the kids, that as we would be called, There was parkies and townies. Haves and have-nots, but anyway, he was a guy who'd be up throwing the football around the whole time. Next one is Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi was in the park for a while. And we know because she didn't like to fly, right? And she'd have a big purple travel bus. It couldn't go into the park. It could only go through the gate and then park at the church. So whenever Whoopi was in town, you'd know because
The color purple.
purple bus would be there. Okay? Let's keep going. So, Richard Delafield. I'm going to have to slow down a little bit here. I don't know what the timing is.
Well, you're 14 minutes over.
Already? I've been up here for over an hour?
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, well,
This is why we don't have dinner in the dining room.
okay. Wow. Richard Delafield was one of the oldest and most prominent families. His grandfather arrived here from England and essentially came with letters of whatever it is. So, I mean, he was rich when he got here. And then his son, Rufus, just became even richer. And what I'm going to do is just kind of tell you a little bit. I just want to read one thing. Let's go through. Rufus was a director of the Mutual Insurance Company in New York, a director of newly established New York branch of the United States Bank, a founder and member of the first board of trustees of the Tontine Coffee House, which was really just a coffee shop downtown in the Wall Street area where all the big guys would get together and decide what they were going to do and what prices they were going to charge. Essentially, Richard comes along and basically keep moving here. Richard comes along, and his father was the president of the Delafield and Baxter Cement Company. He died in 1874 at his place in Fifth Avenue, New York. So what did Richard do? Well, Richard was a member of all the best clubs. He married the daughter of Frederick Foster. He went into business as Delafield and Company. And they dealt with products from the West Coast and Pacific Coast, California. They had branches in San Francisco, Chicago, and St. Louis. Richard loved horses, and as a result, there was no real place to keep the horses, even on his farm in Tuxedo. So that's when he came and started Brook Farm up here in Chester. The Peister Foster, whose daughter he married, was a practicing attorney. And so he also went into business with George Carey. All Fosters, Careys, they all lived in Tuxedo Park. They all had places in Tuxedo Park. So it was a very inbred type of situation. So Richard Delafield became chairman of the board of the National Park Bank of New York, the senior warden and trustee of the Trinity Church. He was chairman of the board of the Mutual Bank, vice president of the Central Union Safe Deposit Company, Colonial Trust Company, and a director of the Mount Morris Bank, the Plaza Bank, and the National Surety Company. Just can't imagine it. I don't know what he did with his time, or where he spent his time, but certainly there were enough banks to keep him busy. As I mentioned before, the Millionaire Train. All these guys just sit around in that train and decide what they were going to do. So if we can move forward, I'd like to show you here. This is part of Brook Farm in Tuxedo. That's the stables where they kept the carriages and the horses behind. Let's go to the next one. Part of the estate, the Brook Farm estate, the greenhouses. We keep going. The greenhouse. I mean, just look at these places. Unbelievable. The amount of money that they have. Let's keep going. This is the last one. Keep going, we'll see. So much better picture of his house.
Wow.
You can see it. As they say, it burned down, but he had it rebuilt. He's buried in Tuxedo Park as his wife. Now, so what happened? How did he wind up getting up here? Well, Harriman, and not the original Pierre Lorillard IV, but I believe it was the Squire. Squire would come up. They obviously E.H. loved horses as well, but the Squire would continue that love. Delafield loved horses, and so they would all come up here to Chester to play and to ride, and obviously Goshen, when the Goshen track was developed as well. Now, his property up here was a 128-acre property with a farmhouse, the training track, stables, barns, tenant houses, an ice house, chicken coops, gardens, and much more than you would expect for a property like this at the time. A very big place in Chester here. The main house and 2 land parcels are 10 acres. Actually, it's for sale today, as probably you all know. It's just a 90 Main Street, I believe, is one of the sections that's for sale. He suffered a bad fall, and apparently he was 76 years old at the time of his death, and that was at Tuxedo Park. And as he said, he was childless, so he had no children. So then we move on, and we can see we're going to be moving on to Robert Goulet. There's Robert Goulet's place here. Across the lake and around the bend is Turtle Mountain and Brook Farms. And you can see the layout of the stables that we saw before. In fact, my maternal grandfather, Bars, my mother's side, he was a superintendent and head gardener for the Amory's, and he lived in the gardener's cottage. Absolutely incredible. Each bedroom upstairs had a fireplace. There's 4 other bedrooms. I can remember as a kid, there's a little button in each bedroom. You could press the button. There was a butler's pantry, and the little thing would pop down and goes, number 4. That's number 4. For coffee in the morning, you know. Pretty great life for people who are just working people. So you can see, as I say, here's Delafield's over there. His house itself was further down the lake, next to the club, and over here, where did I say it was? Is it's in here someplace. Robert Goulet. Robert Goulet next to Juilliard's. Juilliard School of Music in New York. That old Lincoln Center area. That's Juilliard. House burned down. Next one. Here we are. Here was Delafield's, the picture that we saw right up there. Easy walk to the club and the tennis courts. Next one. Here's Bobby Goulet. Can't believe that we've gone over an hour, because let me tell you, the Goulets are about as confusing a family as you could ever imagine. For some reason, they all named the kids Robert. So, to skip through the history of the Goulets, we can get to in 1914, the social pages of the New York Times cheerfully informed readers that Robert Goulet would host New Year's Day trotting races on Glenmuir Lake, part of his estate near the headquarters of what is generally known as the Tuxedo Colony. These midwinter festivities were to serve as a housewarming of the American financier's new home, Glenmuir, which nearly a century later would open as a resort, as we know. Despite the announcement, the public was hardly welcome to attend. The races are to be invitation affairs. The newspaper added, and horses from the stables of the host and from those of Pierre Lorillard, Harriman, W.A. Harriman, and Richard Delafield, and other owners of fast horses living in the immediate vicinity will be contestants. So why did he come up here? Well, apparently his mother didn't like who he married, and so his wife was never really accepted into the society. And so he never used Tuxedo that much. Although they had the big mansion there, he decided, well, you know, my wife is not going to be able to participate in the club activities and everything else, I might as well move up the road, be closer to where we can really have some country and horses and things. We don't need to be in this exclusive establishment. So that's Bobby. Let's go to the next one. Of course, there was Bobby and there was Bertie. Robert W. Goulet and Robert W. Goulet. Robert Warren and Robert Wilson. So he was Bobby. This was Bertie. Bernie built a yacht. Next picture. Robert built a yacht. One was about 270 feet, and this one's a little over 300 feet. That's the way these guys live. Let's keep going. This obviously is pictures of Glenmuir, the gardens. Next picture. The original Glenmuir. How many of you have been to Glenmuir? Whoa, yeah, what a great bar. Great bar. Dinner's a little too expensive for my taste, but the bar is fun to get a burger. Okay, let's keep going. What happened to Robert Goulet's house, just like what happened to the house next door, it burned down. The reason these places were burning down, and one of the things that I really try to do in the book, and Sue, you read that review, is in 1900, 1% of the population of this country owned like 98% of the wealth. Okay? 1% of 90% of the wealth. Now what happened with these places, a lot of them? Well, with the Depression, they didn't suffer in Tuxedo Park, but they couldn't get staff. And when they came out of the Depression with World War II, everybody was going to work. You know, they couldn't get maids, they couldn't get people to live in, you know, they just couldn't get servants. And they were costly to upkeep. What did we have from 1900 to now? Well, we had taxes, women's right to vote, labor unions, you name it. All this kind of happened. And so these places weren't being used, and somehow they just burned to the ground. Or they were left vacant, or they were given to charities to run. So that's what happened to Robert's house. Next picture, what do we have? Just to give you an idea, although Robert's house burned, this is a house that exists today. Private house. It was actually, Laura Lard built it for his sister who was in Europe. And she said, oh, you're doing this tuxedo thing? I'd like to have a house. So Laura Lard built her a house. She came over from Europe, stayed in it for 3 or 4 months, and then went back to Europe and she said, I don't like it, it's cold, it's too big. So she's gone. This is another one that exists today, private residence. It goes back to a railroad guy, obviously. And then actually, one of the Lorillars married the widow of Beard, who was a railroad guy. And then when Lorillard died, she married a Champagne guy, Piper Heisen.
Oh.
So that's, we can keep going. And we're back to the end. We're back to the end. So I hope it wasn't too long.
Very good.
Answer any questions. If you want to take a few minutes, anybody's got a question? Yes, ma'am.
Did you find in your research, was there ever any truth to this?
I'm sorry?
Was there any truth that Harriman had built Arden House to look down?
I heard that too.
Yes. And why I failed to mention that, I don't know. But Harriman was already very, very rich. And he really didn't need to buy a lot from Lorillard. And he had some problems with respect to the Tuxedo Club and some of the people that were members. And so what I understand is he left Tuxedo and said, I'm going to build a much bigger house than anything you could find in Tuxedo Park, and it's going to be on a mountain that looks down on you. And that's basically how Harriman got started. And actually Arden was obviously part of his property, Arden Farms, with the milk and everything, but Arden became part of the town of Tuxedo when they incorporated, which is, I don't know, maybe 1901 or 1887, honestly, yes.
I read in a book that Harriman used to come up from the city on the train, but he wouldn't let it stop at Tuxedo. It would go right past, and he'd get off, and then it would have to either back up or another engine would pull it back to Tuxedo to let those people off.
You know, I don't know about that, but I do know that Harriman was, you know, he didn't have to kowtow to a Lorillard or anybody else.
It was in a railroad book.
Okay.
Stuart, I know she's going to kill me, but I'd just like to introduce to everybody Mary Jean Krieger, who is one of the 3 owners of the Brookview Farm.
Yes.
The Brook Farm right now.
Wow. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it's a wonderful place. I understand. And as a matter of fact, Jake Matthews, who's a realtor, Jake is our realtor because we have our house on the market in Tuxedo Park. We just have we've got 3 grandchildren in the past 4 months. 2 are still coming, and we're kind of redesigning our life. To see what I'm going to do next, I don't know. So, anybody else? Questions? No questions? Well, I guess I went over a long time. In any case, thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank Stuart for his presentation. I know it was longer than most that we've had, but I thought it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting. And he does have some books here available, and we also have some refreshments in the back that no one can go home without having some refreshments because we all can't take these home.
Okay.
So please join us in that, and we truly appreciate
Videographer David, thank you very much.
Computer guy Cliff Patrick.
Cliff, I found the story. So you can correct all the things that I misstated later on. And you can take over with the real Chester.
Well, you were there.
You were there, right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody, my job.
Please don't